It is April 27th at 6 o'clock. I hope you guys can see me instead of my sewing machine. All right, everybody. So here I am. My name is Yvonne. If you are new to the Jelly Roll Club, welcome. This is a channel that's for teaching you how to make a quilt. And I also create lots of fun free patterns that I give away to my watchers. So if you are not a subscriber, you can find me at www.jellyrollclub.com and I will show you how to get there. All right, so let me show you what we're working on today. So you should have gone to my website and you can see the actual handout is pinned at the top of the chat. So let me show you how to get to the website. So I will share my desktop really quick. And so where you find it is right here. It's the Jelly Roll Club. It's www.jellyrollclub.com, the YouTube channel. You already found it because you're here. But if you go on to the website, you have this thing that's called Hip to Be Square. And so you can see a bunch of the other projects we've done. They're all across the top of here. But Hip to Be Square is what we're working on today. You can find a pattern link, and when you click on it, you're going to find the pattern that you see right here. So let's talk about this pattern really quick. So this is a one block wonder. That means we are making a quilt using one block. And let me show you how this is designed, and let me break it down so that you can adjust it to make it bigger or smaller to fit your bed. But first, let me say welcome to Robin and Christine. And we have Honeybee out there with us today, and we have Carmen from Kansas. Welcome, everybody. I see Gloria hopping on. Thank you guys for joining me. Okay, so this is the actual quilt that I designed, and let me show you where the inspiration came from. So I was running around shopping for fabric, and I saw this bit of fabric right here. And it was so bright and colorful. I thought, wow, I love this. By the way, this is going to be the back of my quilt. And so I wanted to capitalize on all of this movement that I had here. And so I designed a quilt that was the opposite of all of this organic stuff, and I did a geometric for the other side. And as you can see, these are all the colors that I picked straight from this inspiration fabric here. And so you see all of these colors are the colors that I picked for my quilt. And so let me break it down for you. This is a half log cabin or a quarter log cabin. Some people call it different names. I call it a quarter log cabin, but let me show you how to make this quilt. So the first thing that you're going to look at is you're going to look at this desktop and you're going to see this. So one block measures 14.5 inches unfinished, which makes an 88 by 88 inch quilt, which will fit a queen bed if you add a little bit of a border on the outside. So if you add a wider border like 3 or 4 inches, it should fit a queen bed if that's what you want. If you don't want a queen bed, if you want to make a laptop, you could make just the center of this quilt just the way it is, and it would result in a quilt that is a nice generous size. You can make it like a lap that's like 60 by 60. However, if you take this and you remove, as you can see the block here in the corner, I've listed them as A, B, C, D, E, and F. If you remove F and E, you end up with a 10.5 inch square, which gives you a quilt that looks just like this, but it's 60 by 60. So if you want to make it smaller, you can adjust this, but you only need 36 blocks, and you would necessarily need a jelly roll that has duplicates because it works best like that. So let me show you the fabric that I used. So for mine, I used this jelly roll, and it is a Kona Solids called Sunroom Coordinates. I don't know if you can see that. And I got 2 of them for this. But if you wanted to make just the smaller version without E and F, you could do a single jelly roll, and you could do something like this because this one has duplicates. So there's like 2 of each strip. You could pair it up with something like this, like a nice bright green, and that would make a very cute, springy looking quilt. Or you could even do like this Riley Blake right here. This is a Lori Holt Hometown Holiday. But if you wanted, this one has also 2 of each color. You could do something like this with like a really nice Christmassy background if you wanted to do something for the holidays. But anyway, this is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to show you how to make one of my blocks and then talk about the construction. All right, friends. Good morning from Australia. Hi, Susan. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. The green line right here, Tina, this one is a boundless fabric, and I got this from the Quilting Cat in Texas. And let me see, what is this one called? It doesn't have a name. Have you guys ever done that? You guys have quilt fabric in your sewing room and you're not sure? I'm not sure what this one is called. It doesn't have a name. It just says it's made in South Korea, but it's really pretty. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I have some blocks that I've already pre-cut for you. And just so you can see the units for these are 4.5, 6.5, 8.5, 10.5, 12.5, and 14.5. So I have cut what I need for each block. I'm going to make 3 sets because I'm going to show you what I did behind me. So let me show you what I have. So each block, if you want to see what the blocks look like, I've already started with the center of my quilt. And the center requires 1, 2, 3, 4 of these 14.5-inch blocks. You start with a 4.5-inch center, or you can sew 2 pieces that are 2.5 inches, which will give you a 4.5 by a 4.5. And then you're going to start by adding a 4.5, a 6.5, a 6.5, an 8.5, an 8.5, a 10.5, and it gets bigger as you go out. Then once you finish that center in this quilt, you're going to be making these quarter squares, but you're only going to make 3. So these top corners are going to require 3. And this is why I said this is a good duplicates jelly roll. Now for the ones on the outside, I only need 2. And then that corner needs 3, and that corner needs 3, and so on and so forth. So let me start by making 3 of these for you. You'll see how quickly these come together. And let me talk about some pointers for sewing this, because this one's a little bit trickier than it would seem. All right, welcome Mary. I see Patty's out there and Tina has joined us. All right, so let me show you my 2-camera view. I'm going to assembly line sew this. And let me just talk to you about how I have prepared. For those of you who want to know what block I'm making right now, I'm going to show you my desktop. I'm going to be making this one right here in the corner, which has the gold on the outside, kind of like this dusty blue in the middle and a green in the center. So that's the blocks, 3 blocks that I'm making right now to add to the quilt behind me. So I'm going to start right here in the middle. And I'm going to take, these are 4.5. I have 3 of each because I'm making 3 blocks. So I just cut 3. So these are 4.5, 6.5, 8.5, 10.5, 12.5, and 14.5. And those are all the colors that I need. So I'm going to set them over here. I just lay them in order beside me. And one of the things that for this particular quilt, you're going to want to starch your fabric. So I have lightly starched my fabric, and I have pre-washed my jelly roll strips. I just kind of soaked them in a bucket and then drip dried them and then pressed them with a little bit of starch. Now I'm going to tell you guys something. This is a cautionary tale. I ordered fabric online and it said it was Kona Snow, but it feels different than my Kona jelly roll. So I'm not sure what grade of Kona I got, but I washed it and it's raveling on me quite a bit, but I'm still going to use it. I washed it in warm water, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully I won't regret my decision. All right, why did I starch this? I normally don't starch quite as heavy, but I starched this because I know that when you're sewing a long strip, you get quite a bit of stretch. So for the middle, like I said, you have the option of doing 1 4.5-inch square, or you can sew 2 jelly roll strips that are 4.5 by 2.5. When you join them together, it gives you a 4.5-inch square. So if you strictly want to use jelly roll strips, that's fine. And I'm going to set that right there. All right, so I'm going to start with this. And I have 3 of them, and I just put it in the same direction to the right. So I'm just going to lay these down. Check your jelly rolls. Make sure that they are exactly 2.5 inches. Some jelly rolls are a little bit wider. Some of them are not quite the width that you want them to be. So I always kind of double check just to make sure. I'm not sure if you guys have ever run into this, but look at this one right here. So as I lay this here, this actual strip is a tiny bit wider than 2.5 inches. So I thought I checked all of my strips, but apparently I didn't. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to lay them one on top of the other and just give them a little tiny trim just to make sure that they are exactly 2.5. Because in this block, it really matters. You cannot match up all of those strips if these are not exactly 2.5 inches. And the way this one works out, it's the little pinking on either side that's bigger. And so I'm just going to zip it off and remove that because that would have changed the finished size of my block. Because all it takes is a tiny bit to be off. And look at the difference that would have made on my block. So I always double check before I start sewing. And then here we go. This is actually better. I don't like sewing with those little pinked edges sometimes, especially if it's something that requires a lot of precision because it can cause you to get off kilter. All right, so that's the first tip. Make sure that all of your pieces are the same, and then you stick them over here, and I just assembly line sew all of them. So over here at my sewing machine, I want to show you something. I've projected the block so you can see. I'm joining A to B right now. And if you notice, I have this seam guide on my sewing machine. I just put it down with a little bit of washi tape. And the reason it's here is because it helps me to keep a straight line. As you sew long strips together, it's easy for them to get out of kilter. And when that happens, then you start losing your accuracy. So when I'm going to be sewing long strips, whether I'm piecing log cabin quilts or adding a border, I do like to keep this right here so that I can align my pieces as they go through. And that just kind of helps me to keep it straight. I learned a long time ago in sewing class in high school not to stare at my needle or my presser foot too much and just allow my sewing machine to feed that. So once I have that, I can just trim this off. And we're going to pull it that way. Let me grab, let me see, a rotary cutter out of there. All right, so let me show you what I've done. Now that I have this, I'm going to pull this off. And I'm going to show you how I press these. Now, the first thing that I want to do with these is I'm going to finger press them open. So I don't need to set the seam, but I'm just going to finger press it like this with my finger to make sure that I don't have any weird puckers. And I'm going to be pressing towards the dark. And so that looks pretty good. They didn't get too distorted and they didn't get off kilter. So now I'm going to press these. Like I said, I've lightly starched them. So I can just press them. And I'm going to press them side to side like this just to make sure that that seam lays flat and that I don't distort my block because these can get distorted quite easily. So now that I have 3, I'm going to lay the next piece on top. Now this is where you can check your seams. If, and I'm going to be checking all of these, remember, if your pieces are sewn correctly with a 1/4 inch seam, then these 6.5 inch pieces should fit perfectly on top without too much issue. So let's just double check this. I apologize for not checking these green ones. I thought I checked them all. Maybe I didn't, but I have learned the hard way that you have to check all manufactured pre-cuts. Some people like to cut their own jelly roll strips because it's more accurate that way, but these colors are so pretty I couldn't help myself. All right, so if I lay this down right here and I don't have anything hanging off the edges, then I know my 1/4 inch seam is pretty accurate. And so you're going to take and you're going to put the color to the top, and you're always going to add the new one over to the right. I'm going to add it to the right. And I'm going to add it to the right. Now on this one, I have a tiny little bit of green that sticks out. It's a small amount. So I'm going to put whichever piece is larger on the bottom because my feed dogs will help take care of that. So if there's anything that's off, like this has a tiny bit of extra green, that means my 1/4 inch seam was a tiny bit wide. I'm going to sew it like this. And what that'll do is that'll compensate for that seam being off just a tiny bit. And it'll fit perfectly the next time. And there's no trimming in these blocks. You're going to see there's absolutely zero trimming, which is one of the things that I love. All right. So let's go over to the sewing machine. And ladies and gentlemen, I am sorry sometimes that I'm wiggling around in here in my sewing room, but I am my own camera person. In addition to trying to quilt and keep track of the live stream and my 2 monitors and make sure my microphone is working, it's a whole task. All right, so now that I've gotten to the end, those are no longer mismatched. Those now match because the feed dogs did the work for me. So if you ever have a piece and one is a tiny bit bigger than the other, put the bigger piece on the bottom and that should take care of that. If you've never sewn with a big, fast, semi-industrial machine, I suggest you do that at least once in your life. I love how quickly this machine sews all my pieces. This is Bertha, and she is my #1 piecing sewing machine because she sews so quickly that I can put a jelly roll quilt together in just a little over an hour. So if you have ever done a jelly roll race, I can do one whole jelly roll race in just a little bit over an hour. All right. All right, so there we have it. So now that you see it, now in this case, I will go ahead and press those seams because where I had to compensate for a little bit of that fabric where my seam was a smidge off, this seam I will set, but you don't have to always do that. And then I will press it to the dark like this. Running my finger across there helps to kind of flatten that out so that when I come in and press it, I'm not putting any pressure. I'm just letting my iron do the work. The iron that I'm using is an old lady that I've had in my sewing room for a long time. She's old like me, but she is an iron that doesn't have an automatic shut off, which can be kind of dangerous because if you leave them on, you could burn stuff down, especially if they fall off the ironing board. But I have her on a power strip, and before I leave my sewing room, I always turn off the power strip. It has a light attached, and I do that to keep me from leaving her turned on. But yeah, you just take the pads of your fingers, and that keeps your blocks from getting distorted and stretching, and it makes them the correct size. Now, if you've sewn correctly and you have a nice straight seam, you wouldn't have any wobbles or waves, which is what you're going for. And so now you're going to lay them like this with your most recent seam to the right, and you're going to lay your pieces across the top. And that'll ensure that these seams end up all uniform the way they are in the image. The next things that we're going to put on here for us are the 6.5 inch blocks and the 6.5 inch strips, and those look correct. And so I'm going to just lay those on top. Now, when you're working with solids, solids do have a right side and a wrong side. If you feel your fabric and it feels raspy, that's the wrong side. And then if you have one side that's smoother, that's the right side. So always check, and you can see it. Now, this is the right side. So even though it's a solid and people don't think that it has a right and a wrong side, it actually does. And you can definitely feel it when you're sewing. If you haven't checked that out, inspect your fabric. I've even used a magnifying glass to kind of figure out which side was the right side and which side was the wrong side. All right, I'm going to go sew these 3, and we'll see what's next. Bertha's the queen. She's the birth mother of my quilts. That's why her name is Bertha. She's the birth mother of the quilt tops in the sewing room. And she's a fast lady. Do you guys have names for your sewing machines? I have names for all my machines. I like to call them cute names But this is Bertha. And she even has a middle name. Her name's Bertha Lynn. So Bertha Lynn is the birth mother of the quilts in here. I have another machine. She's a vintage lady. Her name is Linda Lou. And then I have Gertie. That's a treadle machine. So Gertrude is one of my favorite vintage ladies, and she's downstairs. But all my machines have names. All right. Bertha is a PQ 1500 sewing machine, and she is like right at $1,000 right now. When I bought her a few years ago, she was a little bit less than that. But you can sometimes find Berthas on sale for about $800 in the US. But she is a straight stitch only, but she is a workhorse. She sews through 6 layers of denim. I'm not trying to sell you a machine. I'm just telling you why I love her. 6 layers of denim. She sews with a walking foot. I can sew through just tons of material. Duck cloth. I can make giant things with her, so I like her. All right. Again, just like we did before, put the piece up here to the top, and then I'm going to go to the next one. 8.5 should fit on there just correctly if those seams are straight, and voila! This is how you know that your seams are accurate. Look at that. It fits exactly correct. And that is how you know that your 1/4 inch is on the dot. If you're struggling with your 1/4 inch, this is a great practice. This is also another reason why I also cut my strips to size, because that is actually my cue whether or not my 1/4 inch is off. Some people will lay a big long strip like this on a log cabin and just sew and then cut it off. But what you end up is with a log cabin that's wavy, that doesn't lay flat, and sometimes is the wrong size. Yeah, we get attached to our machines. I don't know if you guys saw the TikTok that Jenny Doan did. She was on a trip for a while. She's one of my other favorite YouTubers, and she came back from a long trip, a mission trip, and she was hugging her machine. I feel that in my bones sometimes. When I've been away from my sewing machine, I just want to hug her when I finally get to sit down again and play with my baby. All right. You see me flipping this around. It's to make sure that my seams go the way they're supposed to go and the pieces are laying where they're supposed to lay. If you are new to sewing, you can see how I'm using both of my hands. I'm using both of my hands when I'm holding my piece because I'm trying to keep it straight. My machine moves really fast, and if I don't use both hands on my pieces, they can go sideways on me really quick, and I don't want that to happen. So what I do with this machine is I simply take, once I get it started, I take my fingers and I kind of lay it on both sides of my strip. And of course you can't see me sewing. I just lay it on both sides of my strip like this, and I let her go to town. And I do that because it keeps my pieces nice and straight. That is the enemy of a log cabin, is to have wavy blocks. How many of you guys have made log cabins and your blocks turned out a little bit wavy? That is one of my things that I have learned. All right, so now that I have this, same thing. That seam looks a little rumpled, so I'm going to flatten it out. And I'm going to push it out. Like I said, it works better if you use your fingers and just kind of smooth it flat and then go. If you're making a log cabin and it requires a lot of ironing, you can also use a seam roller on those and never even heat up your iron. But the iron is more accurate for me. So if I really wanted to, I could just seam roll that with my roller, pull it open, and seam roll that open. And some people do that. They don't use an iron, but I find that an iron is my best friend when it comes to log cabins. Now, if you wanted to make a 60-inch by 60-inch quilt, what you would do at this point, let's see how that one's off by just a smidge. I'm going to have to make sure that that one's accurate. So this one is off a tiny bit, so I'm just going to have to check it to see if I need to trim it at this stage. So I'm going to line up that seam, and that looks like that is the correct. So this one's a tiny bit short. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to fix that in just a minute. But it's not much, so it's okay. All right, so I have these at this stage now. They look like this. If I wanted to make a quilt that was 60 inches by 60 inches, a lap quilt, instead of making the entire thing, and I'm going to share my desktop, instead of making rows E and F, I would stop at D, which is the next row. So I would go A, B, C, D, and stop there and arrange my blocks exactly like this, and that quilt would be 60 inches by 60 inches. So those of you who only have one jelly roll, you can cut it and make it smaller like that, and it would still work. So you guys, is that the name of your machine, Viangenu? I love people who name their sewing machines. Maybe I'll do a post on my page so you guys can post pictures of your machines with their cute names. All right, so now that I have this, I'm going to start the same. See how this seam is vertical, this seam is vertical? I'm trying to keep them the same. Show you what I've got here. This seam is vertical, this seam is vertical. Now I'm going to add the next course to all of these, and it's just going to be the same. I'm going to grab my next piece. So I put them in order by size. It just makes it easier. And we're going to have to double check these. Remember, I said these might be a little bit wider than they need to be. I noticed that on my test block, that these were a little bit wider. Some people asked me last time what I use to design my quilts. I use software called EQ8. And what it does is it allows me to look up fabric that's in my stash. And it helps me to look up the colors and match up the colors. And I can also draw my blocks and color all the tops. Now, this was a tiny bit, and some people are like, oh, why bother? Just make a slightly bigger seam. Just because accuracy matters, that's why. All right. Now this goes on top. And that looks like it fits, so that's a happy time. I don't know why after 40 years in the sewing room, having perfect seams gets me so excited. Anybody else get super excited when their seams match? All right, back to the machine. Now that I'm starting to get these longer pieces, one of the things that I do like to do is I do like to pin in a couple of places. You don't have to, but I just do. It holds them in place. It keeps them from getting wonky on me, especially over here. If I get to the bottom, I don't have to hold it as much. Now that I have a little bit more arthritis in my hands and wrists, I do anything to help that. So, all right, now we're ready for the next step. And this is not going to take long at all. My own ideas, yes, this quilt is most of my quilts are just junk from my brain. But this particular quilt is literally just a log cabin. If you look at this desktop, this is literally just a quarter log cabin, and I just changed all the colors on it. I drew it on my EQ software, and then I colored it. I played with all of the colors, and this is what I came up with. Now, if you notice on this one here, how it has these lines in between, that shows you how to join the blocks. But if you're doing a quilt as you go, this also shows where you would put those strips, those connecting strips, if you decided to do this as a quilt as you go. If you don't have a long arm, this is a great quilt as you go method. All right, let's continue. All right. All right, here you go. Most of my quilt patterns are just drawn from my brain because I dream of quilts in the middle of the night. I don't know if that's healthy or unhealthy that I dream about quilts in the middle of the night, but I do. And then I sketch them. I spend a lot of time drawing on graph paper before I go to my computer to do other things. I just learned how to draft quilt pieces on graph paper a long time ago. And so that's my preferred method sometimes, is literally just go to graph paper. Anybody else design their own quilt blocks using just good old-fashioned graph paper like we used in math class back in the day? I think they still use that sometimes in schools. Yes, Tina, you can certainly do a quilt as you go with this. Would you guys like me to do an entire quilt as you go series so you guys can see me join the seams and quilt the blocks? Now for a quilt as you go, you're going to need a walking foot. Look at that. Perfection. It just makes me so excited. I don't know who else opens that little seam and then goes woo-wee. Because there's just something about that. There we go. And I'm going sideways along that stitch line because that reduces the amount of stretching. Now that I have them like this, same thing. Look at how quickly this block goes together. And then once I get all these 3 blocks put together, I'm going to show you how I'm going to lay them up there. Okay. Now this seam is, no, it's okay. I thought it was off, but it's just, it's got a little tiny bit of stretch there in that fabric. Jelly roll strips, the longer they are, the more stretch they have. If you want to prevent any stretching, what I could do is add an additional amount of starch because this feels a little bit stretchy to me right now. And I don't like it when they're stretchy. And it's also kind of wobbly looking. And so one of the things that I can do is I can use just a little bit of liquid starch. And don't cringe when I do this on my wool mat. I've washed it before and gotten all the starch out of it. All right. So I'm just going to give it a tiny bit of starch because these longer strips are stretching a little bit. And you can feel it because these are not cut on the straight of grain. They're cut on a cross grain. If you notice that, look at this. See how much stretch is in these? And I don't like that. So I'm going to flip them over. And then I'm going to trim them up. Now my background fabric has a ton of starch in it, but these do not. So I'm going to go ahead, they're nice and crispy, there's less stretch, and they're more likely to be accurate now. I'm going to lay this down. I always starch before I sew. If you starch your blocks after you have sewn them in, you can get a lot of weird distortion in your block, especially if you're using half square triangles or quarter square triangles that have some bias in them. You could end up with blocks that look totally misshapen. So anytime that accuracy is necessary or needed, do all of your starching before. Now, if you do these blocks correctly, you won't need to do any trimming at the end. The block will end up perfect. That's the thing about this particular block, which I love log cabins because they can be perfect. Okay, now we're busy. All right. Does anybody else do what I do and starch your jelly roll strips, or do you guys like working with unstarched fabric? All right. Pins are my best friend. I don't know about you, but pins are lovely. All right, I'm going to sew with this blue down because it's like a 1/16 of an inch of excess that I have, and I want to see if it's going to be a problem or if it's just going to sew right in. Okay? All right, so let's go back over here. So remember what I said, if you have anything that hangs out, like this is like a tiny bit, like right there, I'm going to put that at the bottom and the fullness will get taken up by the feed dog. So I'm just going to move that over. And I'm going to start it like normal. And by the time I get to this end, all of that fullness will be gone. I'm using 2 fingers to hold it straight. And by the time I get here, I don't have a single bit of fabric hanging out, so that's good. So just that one little move ensured that my piece, and I have the same on all of these, which means that in my last round, my 1/4 of an inch was off by a tiny amount, like a 1/16 of an inch. And that matters because as you add more rows and more rows to this quilt block, you could be off up to like a 1/4 inch, and then your other strips won't match. So it's important to keep these nice and straight and let them match. All right, and then the last one. Same situation. Pull that pin, line them up on both edges. Stick my finger in there to true it up. Hold with 2 fingers and keep her moving, and that just keeps her nice and straight. It gets harder and harder to do as you get bigger and bigger strips. That's why some people don't like working with giant blocks, because they can be a little bit of a challenge. But if you wanted to make this quilt smaller, much, much smaller, but keep everything else, you could also cut these strips in half and make them 1 1/4 inch strips. And then you would just end up with smaller strips, and that's it. All right. Yeah, I used to have a cover for mine, and then it would get so gross looking. So now I just have 2, and sometimes I wash my wool mat in the sink. I put a little bit of vinegar and baking soda in the water, and I soak it for just a little bit. And then I take and stick it in the dryer. My dryer has like something for drying your tennis shoes, so it doesn't spin around, and I stick it in my dryer, and it dries it. All right. And look at how flat these blocks are. And that's what you want. You don't want any wobbles. You want those to be nice and straight and true. And then that's how you get these nice and straight. And so now, see how this seam is vertical, this seam is vertical, this seam is vertical? I'm going to put my next one across here. So I always keep the last thing I stitched to the right, and that'll ensure that all of my pieces end up correct, with the seams going the right way. Now I'm going to pull my next strip. Like I said, look for the right and wrong, and these are down. And then just double check that all of your seams are correct. This one is facing up. That's the rough part, that's the smooth. Smooth goes down. Same thing on all of these. If I wanted to pin it, I could, but for whatever reason, when this one's on top, I don't need to pin. The smell was awful on your wool mat. It was on mine too when I first got it. But now that I've washed it a few times, it doesn't smell like old sheep anymore. I guess that's a good sign that your wool mat is actually made out of wool if it smells like wet sheep, right? Anybody else get a wool mat that smelled really like a wet sheep or wet dog? All right. All right. When I sew big, long strips like this, I use a small stitch length. For those of you who are wondering, I have a needle that's an 80-12 in here. Microtech, so it's nice and sharp. I switch my needle out every project. And I always use a 2-inch, 2.0 stitch length. But every now and again I do a 1.9 if my fabric has a lot of give or it's not as nice and dense of a weave as I'd like this one is not a very dense weave. So I'm sewing this one with a 1.9 and that just helps to my quilt to last longer. So if you're using a lower quality fabric, if that's what you've got and that's what you can afford, just remember to lower your stitch length. And you can use lower quality fabric. I'd rather not, but if I have to, because there's a cute print that I want to use or the fabric I got in the mail just didn't turn out what I thought it was going to be, then that's how it goes. People have asked me where I get my fabric. I buy my fabric from, I used to have a local quilt shop. Sadly, it closed recently, as a lot of brick and mortar stores have. But if you don't have a local quilt shop, there's several places I recommend. I like the Fat Quarter Shop. I do like Missouri Star if it's a name brand that I know what it is. I get stuff from Fabric Shack in Waynesville, Ohio. They have great sales. I like Paducah, shopping at Hancock's of Paducah. Really, I don't really have a preference, but I have a lot of online quilt shops that do have great options. And they have great customer service. Hancock's has fast shipping and great customer service, so I do like that. All right, last, see how these are sticking out? I didn't check to see if these were the correct length. And I suspect because of how much stretch was in there, that it might be slightly longer than what I need. So I'm just going to get my little applique scissors, and I'm going to trim that off. I'm going to measure that, but I'm guessing that based on that stretch, that little bit was just from the stretch, and I'll see in just a second. I might regret my decision, but I doubt it. All right. That's what happens with lower quality fabric, is that you get a lot of stretch because the weave is so much looser. So the denser the fabric, the less stretch you get with it. Like if you're sewing with denim, you get very little stretch. But if you're sewing with a lower quality calico or a muslin, you might get quite a bit of stretch. Yep, and that was just off by a hair. The rest of it is fine. How would this look with the Grinch jelly roll? I think it would be adorable, especially if you used a lot of reds and greens. Tina, I think it would look great. If anybody else has any questions about the construction of this block and how we put stuff together, please, please, please let me know. And before we leave here, I will show you how to put, so I'm on course E now, right? Oops, that one's too small. I'm going to move it out of the way. Here we go. So on course E, and these look like they're pretty accurate. So now I can go sew. And actually, I'll just go full screen so you guys can see me instead of switching around. Somebody commented about how low I sit in relation to my sewing machine. I kind of like sitting like this because it gets me closer to where my needle is. So I tend to put my chair lower rather than higher. If I'm at a higher vantage point when I'm sewing, then what I tend to do is not be able to see when I'm pivoting or doing certain things on my machine. So I do like to be quite close to my presser foot. I know that's probably not a good practice, but I like it. I don't know. I do know that if I sew too long, my shoulders do start hurting. So I try not to spend too much time hunched over my machine before I take a break. So I do take frequent breaks. I do stretch and go downstairs and talk to my guinea pig named Paco. right, and then one more. And as you can see, this quilt took me about 4 hours to cut every piece that I needed. And to sew the blocks behind me, it only took me about an hour altogether to sew those. So that means if it took me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 blocks, it took me an hour. That means you can probably make this entire quilt top in one day. Because these are large blocks, it goes together pretty fast. Now, as far as quilting this, I am probably going to do some ribbon candy. And ribbon candy is like a looping pattern, and I'm going to do that to break up some of the straight lines. I thought about quilting maybe bubbles or a looping candy. I'm not sure. All right. I'm going to measure this to see if I'm off and see how it starts to get harder and harder to get super straight. And that one should be 12.5, but it's slightly less than that. So I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to make sure that all of those seams are pressed out. Believe it or not, that can actually cause your block to be off by quite a bit if those seams are not pressed out. I'm going to lay that down, and now it's the correct size. So make sure that those seams are pressed all the way out like this, because if you don't press them all the way out, it can throw your entire sizing off, and you want all of those to be the exact size. You're going to have to match all of those. Flat and straight, that's the way we want it. Yeah, definitely I would do something really bright, Tina, with your Grinch fabric. You could do like aqua would be pretty, like a Tiffany blue. You could do bright red with your Grinch fabric. And these are getting to the point where I have to make sure that these are all pressed out completely. And I have no puckers in this. These are nice and flat. And I'm going to measure them. And that should be 12.5, and that's 12.5. So I'm pretty happy with that. And so then I just add my last number. Number F is the last one. So the last thing that I sewed is this one. So I'm going to rotate these to the right again and make sure that I put my last piece exactly where it needs to go. And look at how quickly I did those. Yep, and I need to check these, remember? Check every one of these. The biggest number of strips that the largest number of strips I like to put together in a stack when I trim them is about 6. So that's what I have here. I'll lay those one on top of each other. And I'm just going to sliver trim those babies. All right. This would definitely be a fun quilt if you have some cute fabrics that have like cars, or you could actually only do it in 2 colors. So if you had a 2-color palette like all blues and all creams, this would be pretty, or yellows and blues, because it has such a big graphic impact. All right. I don't often use only solids. Most of the time I use prints, so this is a nice deviation from what I normally do. This looks like it's going to fit correctly, so that means that my 1/4 inch seam is okay. Super important to have an accurate 1/4 inch seam. And look at this, how quickly, let me see, what time is it? 6:50, so if you can make 3 of these in an hour, and I had to stop and do some corrections. If you have these all the right size, you should be able to get this done, like I said, in about 8 hours from start to finish to make the full size one. If you make the smaller one with just the center, then you should be able to get this done in about 5.5 or 6 hours. I agree, Carmen. This one would be, if you do a Grinch print, then I would do a solid red. That way all of your focus is on your cute focus fabric. All right. That's what I love about the Jelly Roll Club. You guys are so generous, sharing with each other and even sharing with me. This is not like a high pressure sewing club. You don't have to buy anything. You can just come hang out and chat with us. One of the things that I plan on doing later this year is having a method for us to get together and do video chatting and maybe have an actual virtual retreat. I don't know if you guys would want to do that or what software you prefer, but I have access to Google, so we could do a Google Meet. And so if you have Google on your iPad, then perhaps we could video chat together. I would just have to create a meeting on my Facebook page, a meeting registration link. That way you guys could get your invite to Google Chat with us. All right. All right. Look at how quickly we're almost done. All right. Now we have this one more time. And like I said, really watch your seams. That one looks like it's okay. This one looks like I might have been off, and I'll show you why. That jelly roll strip was folded in half when I pressed it, and I didn't iron it before I cut it, so it might have gotten an extra. So I will measure that and see if that is accurate. And that is, just needs trimmed off right there. I'm going to just sliver trim that off just like this. I'm using my special applique scissors. And this requires minimal trimming, this block does. Which is what I like. Anytime that I can sew something that requires minimal trimming. Like I've made some blocks that have like 1,000,000 half square triangles that you have to trim, and then that's a nightmare. Okay. All right. And then the last one. Is here, and then I will add this last mustard strip to all of these, and then these are done. You see? All right. So now I will just add this to all of these, and these are getting quite large. They get very unwieldy when they're this large. So let me go over to the machine and try this. I might even try it without pins. I like living dangerously sometimes. Today's the day. Could use my seam ripper. I have done it before. By the way, those of you who are wondering about my pillow, I did seam rip it and quilt the other side because somebody was really worried that I was going too fast and I didn't quilt the other side. But I did seam rip it and quilted the other side of my little pillow. And it's happily sitting on my couch. All right. All right, and let me put this one on the bottom side of this one to make sure that these end up the right way. Now there's quite a bit of stretch in this white fabric, and it's causing me a struggle, but that's okay. I've learned one thing not to order online. Oh, see? This side is correct. What a difference just flipping the fabric over made. Because this white one is stretchy, so I'm putting it on top. The yellow is not as stretchy, I'm putting it on the bottom. Whenever you're sewing a long seam like a border, always start your border and put the border fabric on the bottom. It makes a huge difference. Prevents wavy borders. And then you end up with perfect blocks. Okay, so I'm going to press these really quick, and then I'm going to show you how to put them on next. Because I'm a short person, I'm vertically challenged, I'm going to have to show you how to put these on. So if you notice this, these are going to go on the top right-hand corner when I'm finished. But for now, I'm going to show you how these would go, these three, on the bottom corner. Because I'm really short, and I actually have to use my step stool in my sewing room to get to the top of my design wall. For those of you who know what I use it as a design wall, I have PVC pipe that I put together, and I put wrap batting on it, and I use that as a design wall for my smaller quilts. But then for this big quilt, like this one here, this is a photography backdrop holder, and I literally just clip batting to it, and then I can pin to my heart's content. Let's see, this one was off by a smidge. And then I'm going to press this last one and come out this way. All right. Now, let's go put these where they belong. Are you guys ready? Yes, these blocks work up fast. Look at how quick I made 3 of these giant blocks. And so now I'm going to bring my pin cushion over here. For those of you guys who love pin cushions, I made this a few years ago. There's a whole 2-video series. So I have my little thread catcher, my pin cushion, and it's weighted by one of those little clay pot bottoms. So if you want one of those, I have a 2-part video series you can see. All right, look at how quick this is. I'm not going to get my ladder out and watch stand up there, but all of this has to do now is go like this. And if I were going to do a quilt as you go, I would quilt each of these sections and I would join them with a narrow sashing so that my sashing was about 1/4 inch wide. And so then this goes this way. The whites go to the center like this on this side. And then this part goes over here with the white to the center, and I would use 3 blocks to frame this one. And the reason I said this goes really fast, if you're just making this center part, it's only going to take you about 2.5 hours to piece all your blocks. So now I have this square that's kind of peeping out. I have this square that's kind of peeping out. And now I just need 3 blocks here, 3 blocks there, and my 60 by 60 lap quilt is done. So if you want to do it that way, you can do it that way. And look at how quickly that has come together. So that's how my quilt is starting. And then I'm going to add 6 more blocks. I can get those done tonight in like the next hour and a half or so. And then by tonight, the whole entire center of my quilt will be done. This is going to be my backing fabric. If I decide to make only the center, I might do this as a wide border. Look at this fabric. This is going to look really cute on the outside, so I might decide to just leave the center part and do like a 4-inch border of this fabric and then put it on the back. Look at how fun that is, because it matches all the colors that are in this quilt. And so I might just do that. What do you guys think? Should I just do the center part and then leave this border and make it a lap quilt, or go ahead and turn it into a big bed quilt? What do you guys think? Quick and easy. All right, friends, this is it. You can make this one, like I said, in a day, super fast. I have a couple of more quilt patterns that I am working on that are single block patterns. So back when I first started doing my channel, I did something called the Summer Sampler. And the Summer Sampler had a bunch of blocks on there that are made with only Jelly Roll strips. So my next series is going to be taking each of those blocks that I created and making a one block wonder. So you've got a whole series coming up. I love one block wonders because you end up with a quilt like this one. This one is called Rings of Fire. I made this one. I have a friend of mine who's an Ohio State fan, so these are the letter O. And so this is literally made with just one block. So if you want to make Rings of Fire, this is an easy quilt to put together. You can put together this quilt literally in a day. And it's one of my favorites. My granddaughter calls it the Fruit Loop quilt. But you can do just about anything you want with a single block. And there you have it. All right, friends, I hope you like it. Somebody said no border, somebody said border. Either way, you pick the quilt that you want to make and you get that done. All right, friends, I will see you next week. We are continuing the Fruits of the Spirit. So I'm going to get it done. And then we will, you'll see on my website and on my channel, I'm going to be putting upcoming projects pretty soon because I'm working on those. All right, everybody, you guys have a great Sunday. Have a great rest of your week. And I will see you guys next Sunday. All right, everybody, you guys have a great day, and don't forget to make your Hip to Be Square quilt. All right, friends, thank you for watching. Please give it a thumbs up, share my channel with your friends. I appreciate you guys, okay? Thank you. Appreciate you guys. Bye-bye.